Sometimes the sun beats the ground. Another day, another way. Sometimes the rain falls on down. Another day, another setting for another way.
To get into our discussion, let me remind our listeners that any information you hear in this podcast or read in blogs or references in the show notes is for education and entertainment only. This is not financial advice. Seek a professional expert for your unique facts and circumstances if you need financial advice. Welcome back to the Firelighter Podcast. This is Lambo, and I'm here with a special edition podcast. It's a solo podcast today, recording it on April 10th, 2025. As each of you know, we've had quite a market. The last few weeks has been interesting, to say the least. Market full of ups and downs, and more downs than ups. But what I wanted to do was reflect a little bit about some of the ups and downs of the past and what you might be thinking about. I am a very data-focused person. I like to analyze it. I like to shake it up and sort it different ways and maybe lift out sections or delete pieces that are less relevant. So one of the things I did this morning was I went to the Wikipedia page for S&P 500 largest moves. And on that page, you can find a nice table. There's several tables. They're a little bit different, but the table I like to work with was the one that just had the percentage gains or losses for the S&P 500, the highest ones. So it has the 20 highest gains and the 20 highest losses. It's two tables side by side. What I did was I downloaded that table, and then I said, this data from the 30s, 20s and 30s, even up into 1940, I don't want to look at that data. That was from a whole nother era. I didn't live through that data. I don't know much about the details, but I did want to look at everything later than that period in time, which ironically turns out there wasn't a whole lot of very large percentage move days until you get to 1987. So that's a long way from 1940. Quite a few years of activity that did not have a percentage move significant enough to make our current top 20 list. And the remaining data, turns out there were 15 market day moves that remained in the data set. And those 15 market day moves were broken between four events or periods, if you want to call them that. The first one was the 1987 Black Monday period, and three of the data items were from that period, including the absolute number one move of 20.5% downward that took place on October 19th, 1987. I remember exactly where I was that day at the office. That was my first real exposure to what we're witnessing in terms of a very large market move. And then the next group didn't happen for another 7,600 days, almost 21 years. 2008 financial crisis is what I'll call the next period. And that one included quite a few events. Looks like 4 of the top down days were included in that period, and 2 of the top up days were included in that period. So quite a bit of market moves in 2008. And then we moved down to 2020, and you all remember the COVID market situation, particularly that, February, March type time frame. And the market moved significantly during that period. It looks like we had 5 market events that made the top 20 on the down and up days listing. Of that, 3 of them were down days and 2 of them were up days. And then finally, we have what I call the 2025 Trump tariff period, where we had a move yesterday that turned out to be one of the top up moves on April 9th, 2025. So it's interesting that these cluster around these major events. I would assume that's not a real surprise to anybody. My whole point of going through the discussion that we're about to have, or I'm about to have, is that a lot of people try to time the market. I've gotten a few phone calls and questions from family members and others about, hey, I've got some cash to put to work in the market. I think I should buy. What do you think? Well, here's my comment. You never know when the market is going to give you opportunities, and you also don't know how long those windows of opportunity are going to remain open. And also, you don't know if that opportunity is just a pause and a breather before the larger trend continues. Tariffs were delayed. I don't believe the whole thing is off the table yet, but at least the urgency and crisis may have been relieved. The steam valve popped on the water heater, and now we can kind of take a breath and recover a little bit. But that doesn't mean the issues are resolved. So we still have some time in front of us to figure that out. But at this point in time, I remember back in 1987, my office mate Craig and I were young investors just learning a little bit about buying stocks. And, it was the days of closing your door and making a phone call and calling a broker and paying a commission to make a stock trade. But at the time, in 1987, you literally, after that 20.5% market drop, you could literally throw a dart at the Wall Street Journal and pretty much buy anything on the page that was quoted in the major markets, and you were going to make money. You were going to recover with the market. Well, what did that look like? The first big drop, that 20.5% drop, took place on Monday, October 19th, 1987. And then Tuesday, I didn't pull the data for Tuesday, but it didn't make our top 20 list on either side. Wednesday actually did make our list. On Wednesday, 2 days later, the market went up by 9.1%. So if you were one of the people that saw the news on Tuesday morning that the market had dropped 20% and you panicked and sold equities or your holdings of any kind in the market, you did not receive that opportunity to recover 9.1% 2 days later on Wednesday of that week. But then the following Monday, after a nice weekend news cycle, the market dropped another 8.3%. So you didn't miss out for long because the market dropped right back to where you sold it. But the point is, the market is going to make these moves. There are sometimes knee-jerk reactions. There's different news that can change the trend. Some people call them a dead cat bounce. So we had this dead cat bounce on Wednesday of that year, and then followed by Monday dropping right back down again. We don't know what the market's going to do on the long term when we're in the middle of those. But we do know this, and this is one of the points I want to make. The market didn't move in a large enough individual day way again until 2008. That was almost 21 years later after the 1987 Black Monday. And 2008, 20 years later, the S&P 500 was 386% higher than it was after that Monday drop in 1987. And had you remained invested, your money had almost quadrupled over 20 years, a lot more than tripling it at 386%. But the market continued to go up over time, and many of you have seen those long-term charts and know that if you pull yourself back to a longer period of time, the market goes up and to the right. And yes, there's noise, there's volatility, but generally the market continues to march on. Companies get more profitable and the value of the stock market goes up. In 2008, the financial crisis happened. We had bank failures, a lot of leverage, people buying homes with no money down, a whole lot of that going on. Bonds being packaged up and sold off as high-quality mortgage debt, made up of a lot of mortgages that were not necessarily high-caliber, credit-worthy type borrowers, bundled together and sold off as a security. Well, the air came out of that balloon in 2008, and on Monday, September 29th, 2008, the market dropped 8.8%. That was then followed a little bit later. Okay, so now we're here 10 days later on Thursday, October 9th, the market dropped 7.6%. Followed 4 days later on October 13th by a run up 11.6%. So far in the financial crisis, we dropped 8.8. 10 days later, we dropped another 7.6. 4 days later, after the weekend news cycle, we went up 11.6%. Then 2 days later, on Wednesday, we dropped 9%. And then on October 28th, 13 days later, we went up 10.8%. And then 34 days later, in December, Monday, December 1st, we dropped 8.9%. So we have a whole lot of volatility whipsaw going on there. 2 big down days, a big up day, a down day, a big up day, and another down day. So the market through that cycle went up and down significantly. So within 63 days, you have 6 market moves that are some of the largest in history on the S&P 500. And if you take a look at those market moves, just from a pure absolute value point of view, that's 56.8% ups and downs, one way or the other, large moves that took place during those 60 roughly days. And my point is, who knows when it's right to get in or get out? Within that excitement and crisis and confusion, and there's an opportunity buried in there that says, hey, the market's generally down. You can probably buy the index even after those 6 adjustments. The sum of those 6 large adjustments was negative 12%. So there were more downs than ups in terms of the big moves. But when you have a gift like that, and I'm going to call it a gift, I'm not a big fan of market timers. Even in this recent tariff situation, my policy says you stay in, you ride the market down, you ride the market up, but you have short-term investments that are there to help you meet expenses, and you have longer-term investments that can handle the volatility and longer cycles. What you do is, when you're looking for an opportunity to put, perhaps you have a bonus from last year that you haven't invested yet. Maybe that's a thing that you could do. Now, I want to remind all the listeners, this is an educational program. I am not giving anybody financial advice. Go seek out your own professionals for that. This is purely just discussion and entertainment, if that at the most. So don't make any financial decisions based on what you might see or hear or read on the financial blog. But back to my point. my point is, my advice to my young children that are now 30-something adults, is if you're always buying, you're going to capture some of these down cycles. And if you happen to have a little dry powder laying around when you really have large moves down like this, sometimes it's a good time to put that to work in the market. And if the market's already moved down, let's say I'm down a good solid 15% on my blended portfolio right now. If the market's moved down and you buy in, that's no guarantee that it's not going to move down another 10 or 15 or 20%. So don't just assume that if a lot of bad news has happened that it's over. Tariff issues are not resolved. They could come back and be a negative impact on the market, or it might turn out to be that yesterday or the day before yesterday was the lowest the market's going to reach during this cycle for the Trump tariffs. And that was your opportunity to buy the famous March 23rd of COVID is what I always think back to, where we had a bottom there. We'll get to that COVID discussion in a minute. There are opportunities born in these major crisis moves that give you a chance to put some things to work. Now, today we're talking more about the negatives and moves downward, but I do want to make sure you understand there's also positive moves and upward moves. And we'll talk about that at the end of the episode. But let's move on. Let's move on past 2008. That came and went, and a lot of people got into real estate after that and picked up a holdings portfolio of rental property for very, very good value pricing. Those that had money made money with that money. So it's just another way to change your allocation or your exposure to where you have your money invested. So let's move on. The next big move was in 2020. I call it the COVID period. You all remember this if you've been around for a while. COVID was a very unusual move because it came on hard and fast, and then the market recovered incredibly strong. We did have that, a couple years later, we had a down year in 2022, but that turns out, we've recovered from that as well. But I want to say COVID was one where you had in March of 2020, March 9th, so 4,000 days after that last financial crisis event, a little bit more than 11 years, your S&P values were 237% higher than they were at the December 1, 2008 point of the financial crisis. So your money's a little bit more than doubled from 2008 to 2020, March 9th. And then 3 days later, after that 7.6% drop on Monday, March 9th, on Thursday, March 12th, the market drops an additional 9.5%. So that's a pretty big move down. And then the following day, get this, on Friday the 13th, 2020, the market moves up 9.3%. So it dropped 9.5% on Thursday, moves up 9.3% on Friday, and kind of offset the Thursday drop. And then there's a weekend of news cycle, followed by Monday, March 16th, a drop of 12%. So we got drop, gain, drop, and then 8 days later, Tuesday, March 24th, having reached its bottom on March 23rd, on March 24th, the market goes up 9.4%. So 8 days after that Monday, March 16th drop, the market recovers 9.4%. Again, we're at a situation where there are several moves, 5 moves during the COVID period that were significant enough to make the top 20 list. 3 of those were down moves. 2 of those were up moves. And leaving you with a value At that point in time, it looks like 24.47.33 is where the market closed after that last up move. Okay, so that's it for COVID. Then we move forward, fast forward almost exactly 5 years, and here we are in 2025, April 9th, 2025. Yesterday, the market moves up 9.5%. So at this point, your shares in the S&P 500, the market closes at 5,456. So in 5 short years, the S&P 500 is up 123%. So you've doubled your money in 5 years at the closing prices yesterday. As I said at the earlier in this episode, when you pan back and you pull away and you see a long enough trend, you realize that as bad off as we are right now, we're still better off than we were just a few years ago. But if you have a sense of urgency in getting a hold of your investments and using them for something, let's say you have a short-term memory that's only a few years long and you think the market's on a tear up, you put every penny you have into the stock market and you want to put down payment money on a house, you're going to have to sell wherever the market is. So it might well be that you're down 15 or 20% or even higher, depending on how you're invested. I generally gravitate towards equity index funds, broad U.S. market, and the S&P 500. So I'm not down dramatically, but I am down kind of, at the same level as the overall stock market. But you wouldn't want to have to sell those investments and take a loss, or even, in this concept called recency bias. You remember what happened most recently, in January, you looked at that statement and you said, wow, we are doing so good. You had the election rally, you had another nice move in January, and we tend to remember the peak numbers of your portfolio value, regardless of the fact that the more recent values are still significantly better than a few years ago. But if you put all your money in the market in December or January, yeah, you're down, and that number's smaller. And if you have to sell those assets to put down payment money on a house, it might be a little less than you thought you were going to have. But you have to remember the market goes up and the market goes down. That's not a great place to put any money you need on the short term, because you're going to need time to recover. I have personally a little bit of a fear that this recovery is going to be a little bit longer than the COVID situation, that it's going to take some time for the global economies to shrug off the tariff situation in terms of getting it to resolution that works for everyone. I think that if you continue to push and hold tariffs high enough to try to generate U.S.-based production to supply the market needs, because tariffs are so high on imports that the market can be supplied domestically for the same cost that it would be to buy the imported product, or even a lower cost. That's something that might make sense in a dream world, but the reality is you're going to have the labor costs domestically, which may be a lot higher than it was in the foreign source goods. You're going to have the tax burden on those employees and on that corporate income that may be the same, maybe lower, maybe higher, but you're going to have any number of things, not to mention the disruption and changes of the supply chain to provide the right raw materials at the new location in the new country so that goods can be produced in the United States. Those kind of things are significant moves. They don't just happen overnight. You can't snap your fingers and change a supply location for production. Not only that, you've got the balance issues on these companies that have plants located geographically around the world to feed into other supply chains, to feed into those optimized shipping channels and cost structures to provide goods where they need to be consumed. So those kind of things don't just happen overnight. There may be a prolonged disruption there. But, let's say that the tariff situation gets resolved, the tariffs kind of go away and we go back to normal. Well, there's been a little disruption, but it's easy to recover from if it happens relatively soon. The longer this situation is unknown, the longer companies have to decide where they think things are going to go. They're going to have to make a move. And those kind of commitments, once they commit, they don't want to backpedal again. So if they start breaking ground or setting up a manufacturing facility in the United States, and they get a few quarters down the road of executing on that strategy, and then the tariffs go away, their competitors are going to start buying from the other supply chain that used to be the lowest cost, easiest delivery from wherever it was. So there's going to be some turmoil. Okay, so I promised you earlier, that we talk a little bit about the upsides. We've been focusing on downsides. Let's talk about upsides. At the end of 2024, like many of you, I was looking at my portfolio, and the artificial intelligence market moves that have kind of really pushed the tech companies higher and higher and higher over the last several quarters. Those reminded me a lot of the 1999, 2000, kind of the dot-com bust that also happened to align with Y2K and a lot of things that really pushed the market up as this artificial demand running up to Y2K had companies buying way more than they needed, only to build this massive inventory supply. And Y2K comes and goes. All the computers keep working. The airplanes don't fall out of the sky. And suddenly everybody's sitting on inventory where they bought 2 or 3 years supply because they didn't want to be the company that didn't have product after Y2K came. So you had this glut of inventory that took years literally to work through as people went sideways and the stock market went sideways for a number of years, working out through that problem. Well, on the upside last year, if you had a need for financial assets, it was a great time to sell some of those equities and put that money in a safer investment, treasury bill or a money market account, some high yield savings, wherever you wanted to park it until the actual need took place. So let's say you were going to buy a house in January. You sold everything at really nice margins. At the end of 2024, you put it in a money market. January, you walk into the closing of your new home. You put down a ton of money on that mortgage, and you close on the house, walk in, and you're feeling good because your payment's a little lower because you could afford to put a little bit more down. The thing that I did personally was I wanted to, as a retiree that doesn't have a paycheck anymore, I wanted to commit a little bit more to the bond and less volatile allocation. So I made some moves and reduced some equities and made a contribution of S&P 500 shares, did some things that would actually reduce our exposure to equities a little bit. Now, I didn't make a huge change, but I started moving the boat toward the target I'm looking at, and that would be somewhere in the low 70s of equities, and a little less exposure to the equity volatility. I do believe on the longer term that we need to stay invested in equities. I think we need to keep up with inflation, and our lifestyle, will be different if, for instance, we put it all into a fixed annuity and got a flat number from here until we die. That flat number is not going to go up with inflation. So it's going to buy less and less with its reduced purchasing power as you get out into the future. So I do believe we need to stay invested in equities, but a broad index fund type exposure to equities is all I think we need. And then, have the rest of it kind of in a less volatile type investment, whether it's in a money market or a treasury bill. That money is available for the near term, kind of in the bucket strategy mentality. If you're familiar with the bucket strategy, you kind of have bucket one with your near term needs addressed in bucket one, bucket two that might be more of a balanced fund, blended bond and stock investment, something that's got a little less downside volatility to equities. And then bucket three, which would be, your full-on long-term investments you don't need to touch for 10 years. That type of stuff would be exposed to more up and down movement, realizing that over the long term, it's going to be up and to the right in most cases historically. So that's kind of the way we take it. I confessed to my wife, I made about 1/3 of the move on the allocation that I wanted to make for us. And we do talk about that kind of stuff from time to time. So I don't do it in a vacuum, but even something as simple as moving your allocation and selling equities and buying bonds or putting it in treasury bills, it's still a process and a transaction that feels difficult when you're actually pushing the buttons sometimes. But I wish, coulda, shoulda, woulda. I always say you don't use any OUL. That's the pro tip of the day, by the way. Don't use any OULD words when you're writing or speaking in a formal presentation. I just never like those words, and and here's one of the reasons why. Yeah, I should have done more of those transactions and moved our allocation a little further. But either way, we'll be fine. It's just that I wanted to de-risk our portfolio a little bit more than I did. And as it turns out, Warren Buffett's a little smarter than me. He pulled a lot more money out of the exposure earlier than I did, and he is very opportunistic when things happen like they are right now. It'll be interesting to look at his next quarterly filing to see what kind of moves Berkshire Hathaway made during this cycle. Okay, that's it. The market volatility is something that comes with being an investor. It comes to those that make money in the market. It comes to those that lose money in the market. But if you're a long-term investor, this is just par for the course. Try not to get hung up on daytime TV headlines or evening news headlines that really emphasize how bad these things are, because they're not good or bad. I had someone say, there's no good news, there's no bad news, there's just news, okay? Just report the news. It's not good or bad, it's just news, okay? Just tell me the market went up, the market went down. There's no need for, fear, shock, and awe to capture those advertising dollars. Just avoid those headlines if they really give you concern. There's no reason to be concerned if you're a really long-term investor. But I certainly share the pain with many of you because, you etched in your mind that high point, that high water mark, as I say to my friend Britt over Austin Way, the ATH, the all-time high. Everybody puts that all-time high in their mind, or the handle, the first digit in your portfolio value. When that handle changes to the downside, you kind of feel like you've lost something. Even though it's just a number, it's nothing more than a number. Stay positive. Don't worry about the day-to-day news, but make sure you've structured your approach. And if you're young and you've got a 50-year horizon, wow, just stay in the market every time you get a chance. Every paycheck, you put money in your 401k, you invest it. And you will wake up a millionaire one day and you'll say, I can't remember why, but I was stressed out when the financial crisis hit or when COVID hit and our portfolio dropped so much. Well, the reality is it recovered. Even the COVID bottoms, from March 24th to the Trump tariffs, the market went up 123% on the S&P 500. So from the end of the financial crisis to the COVID period, The market was up 237% from the 87 Black Monday to 21 years later. The market was up 386%. So just pull back a little bit, pan back, look at that long-term direction. And sometimes it's fun to analyze the numbers. And I encourage you to look at data sometimes and sort it and look at it a different way and see how it speaks to you. This is Lambo, the Philighter. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Hey, I just really want to apologize. Apparently, I do need a pop filter with this new microphone, and I'll see how much I can clean up this audio in post. I'm sorry it doesn't meet my normal caliber of quality. Stick with us. We got another chance next episode. This is Lambo, the Philighter, College Station, Texas.
Another day, another way. Sometimes the song beats the ground. Another day, yet another way. Sometimes the rain falls on down. Another day, another setting for another way. Another day, another way. Sometimes the song just beats the ground. Another day, another way. Sometimes the rain falls on down. Another day, another setting for another way. Walking side by side in the sun, feel the drops of sweat. Watch them fall onto the ground and disappear. Clear your mind like the sky up above, a clear blue set. When the day fills up your senses, nothing's far away, nothing's far away, and nothing's near. Nothing's far away, nothing's near. Another day, yeah, another way, another day, yeah, another way. Hold me in the sun, in the rain, baby, yeah. I'll do the same. Another day, another way. Sometimes the song just beats the ground. Another day, another way. Sometimes the rain, it falls on down. Another day, another setting for another way. Sitting on the porch, listening to the rain filter through the trees. Watch it fall all to the ground and pools appear. See the porch light dancing in the drops, hanging from the eaves. And when the colors fill your senses, nothing's far